So many people come to France for vacation, spend a week or two here, and think like, I have to live here, come here, and then are out in like 6 months. And I don't want that to happen to you, although it might happen to you. We're going to discuss it. Only you're going to know. I've lived here for about a decade of my life at this point, long enough that they gave me French citizenship. I asked for it. But I've seen this happen time and time again. And I wanted to share 3 high-level things with you today that I see get in the way of so many people's dream of living in France that I think if they knew was coming, they could be better prepared for. Or maybe they would know they shouldn't have tried in the first place. We have 3 to go over, and the third one is probably the touchiest of them all. We'll see how we handle it when we get there. I do have some resources linked below, and I'll tell you more about those at the end if you are thinking about moving here and you would like to get some help. Also, this video is sponsored by BetterHelp. We'll dive into that in a second as well. But let's just jump into the first thing, which is language. So many people come to France without speaking French. It completely blows my mind. And even if you've studied French and you think you speak it, you probably don't. Not until you lived here for a little bit. I studied French all 4 years of high school. I got a major in it in college, so I studied it for 3 years in college, and then I moved here right after college, and I definitely was overwhelmed for the first few months. It took me a solid 3 months of like real effort of avoiding speaking in English, talking as much as I could only to French speakers, which was extra hard because I lived in Nice, and the Niçois are not very available. They're a fairly closed off group of people, by and large. That's the reputation, and it, at least in my experience, holds true. It was a very, very exhausting experience, but one that was well worth it. So after 7 years of education and 3 months of intense immersion, followed by another 4 months of just using my French as much as I could, I would say that I spoke French at that point. I was fluent for sure. That's a lot of work. And if you have to come here and you have to work a full-time job, or you have kids, or you have whatever going on, the language can be a huge, huge barrier to entry. And for most people, it's not an easy language either. Like, I personally found German to be way easier to learn than French. I got a German minor, and within a couple years of studying German, I felt like I caught up to 7 years of studying French. To each their own. You probably think Spanish is easier than French, which I think it is. French can be a really challenging language. It is, however, necessary for life in most of France. I live in Paris. I've lived most of my French life in Paris. You can get by with English only in Paris to some degree. I know people that do it. I know people that have lived here for a decade or longer who really still don't speak French at all, or whose French is simply atrocious. In so many ways, you can insulate your life in a way that keeps you from having to speak the language. And now with ChatGPT and like the translation abilities that are available to you are pretty insane. So it's easier in a way not to learn French, but your quality of life will not be as good. You won't be able to integrate at all. You won't be able to meet and get to know so many wonderful French neighbors that you're going to have. The community here in Paris, the community at large, I was just in the south for 10 days. I met so many people who did not speak any English. I ended up translating for some random tourists at various points on my trip just because I overheard the rough nature of what was going on, whether they were ordering or trying to flirt or whatever was happening. And I just had to turn around and do a quick translation for people. Like, speaking French in France, I would argue, is a requirement for a high standard of living. You can get by without it. I would not think you should. And you should be prepared, again, that it's hard, and learning a new language in the midst of moving to a new country, new culture, there's a lot going on. You're setting yourself up for a really stressful time. We'll get into some more reasons why in the other categories. All of these kind of overlap to some degree, but not speaking French, walking into work, administration, just setting yourself up, dealing with taxes, all these things, it just, man, it's already stressful enough speaking French. Not speaking French, I would not want to walk down that road, which is why I think it's really important also that you don't shy away from your English-speaking community, or whatever language is your native tongue. Finding like Spanish speakers, Portuguese speakers, German speakers, whatever. Finding people that are having a similar experience to you, that are going through the same process as you are, that are also immigrants or expats, however you fall. Those relationships can be very, very valuable because as you slowly build your language skills and find French friends, which I made a whole video on, can be very difficult to do. It's really, really helpful to have people around you that can relate to you and that can help walk you through whatever it is that you're going through. So a lot of younger people especially will shy away from having any English-speaking friends, purely intent on speaking French. I did that. I understand. However, I also fell into an English-speaking community forcibly through my roommate and the people I lived with in Nice, and I had a support structure that I didn't fully appreciate at the time. And I would argue, don't completely shy away from it because it's going to make your life even harder if you don't. And of course, course, if you need someone else to talk to as you're going through this, perhaps a professional. Which brings us to today's paid partner. BetterHelp is a platform that will connect you to a wide variety of specialists and providers that can talk to you professionally through stuff like transitioning into a new culture, making new relationships, watching the entire world crumble around you. Apparently, there are so many things to talk about that are great to talk about with friends, but it's a completely different thing when you're talking to a trained professional. BetterHelp allows you to talk through text, voice, or video. Scheduling is super easy, and one of my favorite things about it is they don't penalize you for jumping from provider to provider until you find the one with whom you click. I'm very lucky that I found a therapist here in Paris with whom I click very well, and I've had her for a very long time, and I know how valuable that can be personally. I also know through so many friends how hard it can be to find. So BetterHelp can be a really great way to enable you to connect with somebody that you connect with and keep that conversation going and alive, and hopefully on a very deep and productive level. Use the link below, betterhelp.com/jswanson. That's betterhelp.com/jswanson, or my code jswanson when you're checking out to get a discount on your first month of therapy. Highly recommended. Which leads us also into another recommendation, which is to be fully aware that you're stepping into a completely different culture. That's number 2 of these big 3 things. Make sure you stick around for the third, because it's probably the touchiest of them all. Americans in particular really tend to think that European culture is going to be like America light. They walk into it. I've had so many conversations with people that are flabbergasted that the French do anything different. I would recommend that when you're coming into life in France, that you, if you can, I realize I'm about to, I don't mean to sound preachy, but try to walk into it with the mindset that maybe the French will do something similar. And then you'll be wonderfully surprised at how similar we really are, but you won't be shocked by how different we can absolutely be. The big one, the headliner for this, that your entire experience is likely to get just rocked by repeatedly, is French administration. One of my friends, Jessamy, who is in the video that I'm making for how to do Paris with kids for Paris in My Pocket, she told me that the 3 steps to truly becoming French are to get your French citizenship, get your French driver's license, and restructure your business in France. That is really true. If you can go through those administrative hurdles, they're different and painful for a variety of different ways, but if you can survive that, you can survive anything in France. And that's something to be very aware of. Things move very slowly here, which is kind of like a tie-in to this, but the admin is a big step in that. You're gonna have to go through your visa process. It's gonna be painful. You're gonna end up standing in lines you don't understand. You're gonna have to bring documents to meetings with bureaucrats that do not give a crap that you're there, that are not really there to help you. They're just there to stamp you through or maybe reject you. They're gonna ask you for documents that you didn't bring, that you were not told to bring. There's a whole lot of like talking down to you and things that are gonna happen that if you were French, you'd be pretty used to. You wouldn't like, but you'd be used to. If you're American especially, but I think if you're kind of from, well, I mean, I've heard that like Italy and Portugal are pretty rough on these fronts as well. So, you know, depending on where you're from in Europe, this might actually be a walk in the park. For Northern Europeans, North Americans, it's really, really, really challenging. Things are going online more and more. The visa process is completely different than the one that I went through. Even the citizenship process, I was among the last to apply for French citizenship with paper. I made the cutoff by like a few days. Everything is going digital slowly, but like really slowly. This is stuff that's been digital in a lot of other countries for a really long time. The admin is just bloated and it's very difficult to get through. The French complain about it themselves, but it's just a monster that they've decided to embrace and live with. And it's something that you almost can't, I mean, I can describe it. I've made multiple videos about it. I've written about it in my book on moving to Paris, which I can also link below. It's always linked below. It's in the description all the time. I should plug that more often. It's the place that drives you mad. Like, there are stories. They are insane. But things move slowly in so many other ways. Getting your bank account is going to take a long time. One of the really big ones that's going to tie in as well to the last big point that we're going to make is getting an apartment can be really slow. I was just in the United States and I was with a friend in New York and my dad in San Diego, and they were both looking to get apartments. They both went and saw apartments and signed for them that day. Like, they walked in without an apartment and they walked out with an apartment. That is something that I had forgotten was so incredibly fast. And the people, they are incentivizing you to rent apartments in America. Like, they offer free rent on the first couple months of your lease in some buildings. Like, it's very expensive. Like, American rent, we can talk about like life in America, very, very expensive. It depends on where you are in France. I'm sure there are some places where there is a surplus of housing and it's easy to get one. I'm sure that those places exist. You can leave them in the comments below if you'd like to tell people where to move if they want to get an easy apartment. Let them know. If you're coming been to Paris and so much of the rest of France. It does get easier, I think, outside of Paris. But like, let me talk about Paris for a second. Because again, my friend in New York, she got an apartment really quickly. My dad, San Diego's not a small town, got an apartment very quickly. It can take you weeks or months to get an apartment here in Paris. I know people that have spent months and months looking, finding them, going to showings, lining up with 40 other people. When you go to a showing, you also have to bring a dossier, like all your paperwork to basically kind of apply on the spot, but you're not really applying. You're just saying, hey, please consider me. Here's proof that I am who I claim I am. Here's proof that I make enough money, blah, blah, blah. It's its own thing. It's an entire universe, which is why, like, I have a friend who is a relocation expert. She helps people move over, find apartments. I've linked to her below, Flats Paris. I asked her some questions to include in this video. I haven't heard back from her yet, so I might not be able to put those answers in here. We'll do more videos with her. I've done videos with her in the past. We can do more videos in the future. If you have questions about apartments, let me know below. But like, it just takes a long time to get an apartment here. I have met a few people who managed to get an apartment in 1 to 2 weeks because they made it like their full-time job. They did nothing else and they were incredibly organized and just bullheaded about it. They were super, super ready. That's really rare. Most people I know really struggle, especially without help. And then there is bad help out there as well, or at least less helpful help. I don't know if I want to call them bad. That sounds like a moral judgment. And like I said about like, if you're American or wherever you're coming from, France is not your culture light, right? Like, it's not America light. There are so many differences here. It's not a convenience culture. Things close. Restaurants don't serve food in the middle of the day sometimes. Everything closes down on Sundays or Mondays, depending on where you are. It can be very confusing. Nobody really cares to advertise when they're open, when they're closing, when they're going on vacation. It's a politeness culture, not a casual culture. So Americans often feel off-put by politeness and formality, where the French feel very much more comfortable with being polite and formal first and then working into informality. That's why we always remind you to say bonjour when you're walking into any new place. And there's a whole song and dance that you come to understand over time. And there's a lot of grace for you if you don't know it, if they know you're a foreigner, but it can be a very uncomfortable experience as you're getting used to a new place. And again, if you walk into it expecting them to adjust to you, they're not going to. Like, you're walking into their home, you're in someone else's country, you need to adjust to them. You don't have to completely like assimilate and lose your identity, lose where you come from. I will never be fully French, and that's fine. I'd like to bring both worlds together and hopefully have the best of both. Ideally, I think that's a wonderful, beautiful thing. But like, I also understand French culture and I know how to do the song and dance and I know when I've screwed up and I've paid my dues, right, to get there. So the early stages can be pretty tough. And also, if you're not white, like I have a lot, the white male thing is very real here as well. France doesn't gather statistics in the same way that we do in the States. So they kind of turn a blind eye. They do turn a blind eye to systemic racism and a lot of problems that exist within society here. So it can be very easy to pretend they don't exist, but they do exist. And there are going to be, if you don't look like this, I mean, I already have, some issues being a foreigner, but generally being like a white American man who speaks French, people are very interested and very fascinated by that. They don't expect Americans to be able to tie their shoes in the morning. So the fact that I can actually speak French gains me a lot of points, and that actually makes my life a little bit easier. And black people from the United States are treated differently than black people from Africa. There are different like layers to this. We should probably have a conversation with someone who does not look like this to talk about that more deeply. But just as a forewarning, because I have had that conversation with African Americans who've come over from the States and have been surprised that things don't always run as smoothly and racism-free as they were hoping, which can be heartbreaking for a lot of people. So just be aware that it still exists here. And we'll take it from that more somber note into the tricky note, I suppose, which is the third thing today, and that's money. Money, there are a lot of really big differences with money, and it's not just that we operate on the euro here and not the US dollar. But the main headliner for this is probably that like a lot of people quit because they don't have enough. Like they don't save enough, they're not prepared. They come into it. I've met some people who have saved large sums of money, who have like really prepared in that way, but because they were not aware of how long it was going to take to get an apartment, they didn't realize how expensive it was going to be to maintain their standard of living from somewhere like New York, let's say. There are a lot of things that can kind of get thrown into the mix where money ends up making it more challenging than it needs to be. And you probably have, I hope you have a better education with money than I did when I first came here. When I first came here, I had no money. When I first came here, the first time I was here, I was an English assistant. So I was making like 750 euros, 780 euros a month, I think, and just scrounging by on that. And I didn't make any money outside of it. I couldn't even afford Wi-Fi. The second time I came here, I was a volunteer on a hospital ship. So I was making a little bit of money off of the money I had raised for them. So I had a little bit of income, and I was an English assistant again. So I had a little bit more money, but there were a couple months there where neither of them were paying me. So when I was first here, I was literally sleeping on somebody's floor. And then this last time when I came back, I had this tiny little apartment to move into, which was an absolute lifesaver. I found it the last time I lived here, but I was on the verge of going bankrupt like that. And I've told that story before. We can go into detail with that again if we need to. But like I was working like 3 or 4 jobs at a time, vlogging daily, just struggling and scrounging to get by. Very, very stressful. So I've been through it on that side, and I do not recommend it. I do recommend you save, you have some revenue, like something coming in. You don't want to just be operating off of savings because again, you don't necessarily know how long it'll be to get established. And then you have to think in terms of like, do you have a visa that allows you to make money? There are limited visas that do that. Are you then going to have to deal with taxes, your double taxation? If you're an American citizen, you'll be taxed no matter where you go. There's a treaty with France on the double taxation side of things, but you got to make sure you have an accountant. I have 3 accountants right now. Do I have 3? I have the accountant in the States for my US business. I have the accountant for my US taxes that understands French tax law. And then I have my French accountant who does my French taxes, my business taxes. So I have 3 accountants right now. That it gets complicated. Money is not a straightforward thing. It also means that if you become a tax resident here, I don't fully understand this. This is not financial advice. Again, I have people you can talk to below about business, money, all that kind of stuff. Trinier Consulting. They're amazing. I've been working with them on some of my business stuff. They become friends. I really, really enjoy them a lot. But like it affects how you can invest and what that looks like. The French do not like trusts. That's a structure that they absolutely frown on. So if you happen to be fortunate enough to have a trust of whatever sort, be careful how you go about doing that in France. There's a lot of tricky stuff that you're going to have to look into. It gets very confusing. And even when you get help here, this comes back to the administration and just culture as well. I've had to fire 2 accountants here in France because they misled me into bad situations. Because the mentality with French accountants, not all of them, the one I have now is really good, very proactive. We tested him. He didn't know this. Maybe he's finding out now. We made sure to actually like test him and see where he was going with his advice, so I would know whether or not to stick with him. But a lot of French accountants, they won't proactively tell you much. They'll answer your questions if you ask them, but that means you need to know what questions to ask to get the answers to keep you going in the right direction. It can be very, very tricky. And then of course, like not only the time it takes, but then the cost of moving here. If you're gonna buy, for example, a lot of people aren't aware that there's a 7% notary fee on top of like all the regular closing costs of buying an apartment. And that can actually hinder a lot of people's ability to invest here. And then there's also like debt. You're only allowed to take out up to 1/3 of your income in debt. So credit cards aren't really a thing here. Even though I have a French American Express card, I have to pay it off at the end of the month. There's no carrying it over to the next month. You have to pay it off. So just the way that they structure credit and debt is very different. I think it's good. It prevents a lot of abuse. It prevents a lot of just falling into deep holes with money. But it also means that you're very limited in what you can actually do. And that capital shortage also rolls over into France as a whole. If you're a business owner, if you're looking to start or do anything, it can be very tricky to get started and very expensive, and the administration can hinder you completely. We've talked about URSSAF. It's the social charges wing of the government is just brutal when it comes to this stuff. They almost put me out of business twice now. When you're getting started, they're a big risk. They're a challenging group to have to deal with. Again, you want to have a good accountant that leads you away from that, which I did not have. But you can see how things are just different here, and you're going to have to learn a lot and have some buffer to make mistakes and understand that some of your money is just going to vanish in the process. So if all of this has actually inspired you to want to live in France more, if you're there are more challenges here, or maybe you knew them but they're better to find, or maybe I've opened up some interesting things for you to dig into, but you're like, yeah, I can take this on. Great sign. Go for it. You should move to France. Give it a try. I love it. I'm very happy here. I love my life here. I'm so happy to be back in Paris. I've been gone for 3 weeks and I've missed it terribly. And I can highly recommend life here. The quality of life is so good. Even though salaries are lower, this is one of the things that was in the money thing that I forgot to say. Salaries here are significantly lower than they are in the United States. But the cost of living is also lower, and the services here are better. and we're generally better cared for, and the quality of life is higher. The French might make less, but they work less, and they have a lot more vacation, and they sure do seem to enjoy their lives a lot more. So there's a huge trade-off to be made, and I think generally it's a very good one. And I'm very happy that I made it. I'm very, very happy to be here. So be sure to check out the links below for like Trenier Consulting if you're looking for business advice or financial advice, whatever. They've lived here for a long time. They've raised their families here. They've done nonprofit work. They've had their own businesses. They're very, very smart, interesting people that you should check out. And then Esther with Flats Paris, if you're looking to move here and you don't want to do it alone, you want somebody to help you relocate, to find a new apartment, whether you're looking to buy or to rent, she's the right person to do that. She's helped a lot of people I know get into apartments that they love, and hopefully she'll be helping me next year, I hope, to get into an apartment that I love. I'm so happy to have this place, but I'm ready to have enough space to host. Let's just put it that way. Be sure to check those out below. Thanks to Mark Dunning, today's patron producer, and all of my patrons for making all of this possible. We'll be talking more about them here soon too. Some really fun perks coming your way, including some exclusive recommendations that I'm not making available anywhere else. Thanks for watching, and if you're interested in more stuff on life in France, let me know in the comments below. Talk to you soon.